Hey, Dave Kelly with HeadGames Motorworks. Today we're going to talk about why do people love the 1.5 JZ. Check it out. The question I often ask myself is, why do people think the 1.5 JZ is a good idea? I mean, just for me, one look at the cylinder head and I am instantly turned off. But it is popular, so there has to be a reason for this. What about it attracts everybody? So what I did is I scoured the internet and I talked to some people, and I have decided that we are not going to base this completely on my opinion. We are going to look at parts availability, we're going to look at the flow bench, we're going to look at the power that it can make, and we're going to come up with a conclusion. And we're also going to compare it to what I think is a much better alternative. Let's dive into this combo and see if it can seduce me. So what I learned about this combination is that everybody goes to it not because of the cylinder head, but because the presumed idea that you can spin the 1JZ faster. So you can run more RPM than you can a 2J. And that's because it has less strokes. But that goes away when you put this head on a 2J. On the 2J, now we have the same bore, same stroke as a 2JZ, and you are left with a cylinder head, in my opinion, or idea, so I'm trying to get this thing to woo me, that is a little lackluster. And what don't I like about it? Let me show you. So you look at the intake port, I just think that the intake port is shaped kind of weird. It's not straight, it's not, well, it's completely crooked. There is so many different varying sizes of it. When I say that, like, it goes in 3 different directions. Don't get me wrong, the 2JZ GTE does the same thing. It is 3 different ports, but why? Why do we have to have all this craziness? So then they pair that port with a 32mm intake valve. Why they went to a 32mm intake valve on an 86mm bore? There's obviously enough room for it. I don't know. A lot of guys will go to the 2JZ valve, which is 1.5 mm or 1.6mm oversized, and maybe we'll dive into that on a different video to see if it wakes this thing up. But I kind of doubt it, but I don't understand. So they did a 32mm intake valve and a 30mm exhaust. Now let's go into the exhaust. This is where I really have the problem with the 1J. The exhaust port is so small. Like, let's compare it to a quarter. A quarter is actually not even that much bigger than this exhaust port. And I get that they'll make power. You can make upwards of like 700 with this thing, but so not optimal. So you guys are probably wondering, what is my alternative to this cylinder head? What could bring all this value that this one gives you? I present you with the 2JZ GE VVTi head. Now you're probably wondering, Dave, why the hell are you showing us a head that's from an IS-NA head? I have a turbo 1JZ and I need the 2JZ turbo head to make any power. Well, you actually don't need that head and you don't need the turbo head. Although this head, well, we'll get into that later. Let's talk about this versus this. I think it's very easy to see by eye that the 1JZ is a slight smaller than the 2JZ GE VVTi head. And I think that this one would make more power. You also see how the exhaust ports are laid out. You have a dogleg port and you have 2 ports that are next to each other. The exhaust ports on the 2JZ VVTi head are kind of straight. They're round, they're straight, and they're bigger. 1JZ versus 2JZ VVTi, you will see that the ports look very similar in size. Again, I'm not familiar with the volumes of each head, but we're going to check this out on the flow bench and see which one reigns supreme. I would still go with this port because it is almost straight and it's also raised 1.5 inches over the 1JZ. So if you go from the deck to the bottom of the port versus the deck to the bottom of the port, this one is raised, which gives it a better angle to the back side of the valve. and would actually run better. Now I chose the GE VVTi as the alternative because it has a cam sensor. You could use the GE non-VVTi and the intake port's actually bigger, but it doesn't have a cam sensor. This just makes it easy peasy if you have a 1JZ. On the 2J, you have a 33.6mm intake valve and a 29mm exhaust valve. So you have a 1.6mm larger intake valve than the 1JZ, and the 2J VVTi head, or actually all the 2Js have a 29mm exhaust valve, which is 1mm smaller than the 1J. Combustion chamber to combustion chamber, you have a smaller chamber on the 1J compared to the 2J. This does not bother me. I would not concern myself with this because pistons are a thing. As far as parts accessibility, 2JZ stuff, you can get a 1J or 2JZ intake cam and it will fit both heads. So if you bought a 1JZ cam and you bought a set, you can reuse your intake valve, but the exhaust cam is not going to fit. The #1 journal is completely off. But everything else, from spring kits and the buckets, you can reuse on both heads, which is a plus. And a lot of guys use the 1JZ, when they have a 1JZ, they'll put a 2JZ valve in it, which we're gonna have to test that. I don't know, I've never put one on the flow bench, although we have done them. I've never flowed one. We're gonna see what that does, another video. But they all interchange. You can use the parts from each head into both. So I know what you guys are thinking, but Dave, I have a 1JZ head and I already have the manifolds. Why would I want to change everything? Well, I think if you're going to stick to a stock short block, I don't think that there is much to say there because you're going to be limited by your cylinder head no matter what. And that really comes to the next thing is if there is a stop, right? If there's something like you're going to make like 700 with a stock short block and you can make 800 with the stock short block on the 2J, really where's the advantage of spending all that money, rechanging everything over? There I get you. But if we're going to build beyond that, then the total package to me is just to go to 2J and then you have something to build on. And we've made 1500 with the 2JZ VVTi head, the GE head, and we've had no issues. The car makes great power, it makes power everywhere, and as I said, you can build on it. I know that you're gonna hit a wall when it comes to the 1JZ on power potential. You are not going to make 1500, 1800 horsepower and spin this thing to 10,000 RPM with a 1JZ. I know you guys think you can, but you're going to be like, I want to be different. But being different just makes you not seem as smart, because the smart idea would be to change to something that knowingly has that potential. With the 2J, you can make 800 with a stock intake manifold. So are you really like having to buy another one? And then we're going to get into pricing. This is a big thing, I think, for people who think that they have to spend all kinds of money. Maybe you don't. When it comes to pricing of these two cylinder heads, I am still waiting for this 1JZ to woo me into thinking that it's the better alternative. But when I looked on eBay, I noticed that the prices for the 1JZ, just the cylinder head, I could buy a whole 2JZ GE long block. And I get that the rod and the piston is not the same and you can't hold all the power, but I can use all that money that I'm saving on selling my 1JZ stuff and purchasing a 2JZ GE on rods, pistons, and building something that I can build on. So far, it hasn't wooed me, and I'm a little disappointed. Next stop, flow bench. Let's see what they flow. Maybe this thing will just be gangbusters and turn me into a 1JZ guy.
gotta be wrong.
So I thought there was a problem with the flow bench or the way I was doing it, but what I learned is the exhaust is just garbage. It just does not flow worth a damn, and I don't know if there's really much you can do about it. That was light years more than the 1JZ. Let's check the intake. Wow, they are very, very close. That's pretty impressive. The 1JZ and the 2JZ are not the same on the exhaust side. You can see that the size of the port really, really matters. And although they're the same between 100 lift, 150 lift, but at 200 lift, the 2JZ GE just starts walking away from the 1J. I mean, we're talking a good 30 CFM throughout the range from just the size. Now it's a smaller valve and it's a bigger port, but the 2JZ GE is, as I thought, was going to be the winner here. On the intake side, man, these things are close. It is so cool to see this. Now, I did not like the port shape, and I thought that the smaller valve would be a huge disadvantage to the 1J, but it hung with the 2J GE head really throughout the whole range, and we're talking a minimum of maybe 6 CFM only at 400 lift, but other than that, the 1JZ actually outflowed the 2J, and I can call myself completely surprised. Undeniably, the 1J and the 2JZ are like a symphony, and the 1JZ definitely has a distinct sound. I won't say that it doesn't sound good. That thing sounds so good at RPM. Pretty much it sounds good anywhere it's at. And if I were to give it one strike or one check, if I would give it one check, it would definitely be for the noise it makes. At 700 horsepower, 800 horsepower, I think that the 1JZ just sounds so good drifting around the track. But can you compare it to a 2500 horsepower 2JZ going down the racetrack? That one's a tough one for me. 1 check, 2 strikes. 3, 5 stars, 2JZ. So you might think that I am biased in this whole video because I looked at the head, I was already not liking it, and then I tried to poo-poo on the 1J throughout the whole video, and it actually surprised me in the end. So I don't think that's a bad thing. Maybe, just maybe, we can put an oversized valve on the intake side and actually outflows the 2JZ GE head, but I don't think you can overcome the exhaust. The exhaust is just a turd, and I think that if you're looking at power potential, it just doesn't have it. It's not going to make the same power as a 2J. I don't care what you do to it. I don't think you could make that port big enough to do what you're trying to do with it. So ultimately, I think that the 2JZ GE head, it beats the 1J in price and availability of parts. And, you know, because you could get one in a junkyard, you're not doing that with a 1J. 1J, only Japanese, you have to get it from an importer, what have you. It's really hard to get parts for it. 2J, GE, VVTi, they only, they make them, I don't even remember what year they stopped making them. I think 05, 06, but either way, it's much easier to get parts for it, and it flows better. It has more power potential. I think everything altogether makes the 2JZ GE VVTi the clear winner here. Next up, we're going to put oversized valves in it, and we're going to see what it flows with what everybody else does. So we're going to put 2JZ valves in it, flow it, and that's it. You can even MF me down below and say, man, I love the 1JZ. I can't believe you, Dave. I get you, but prove me wrong. I don't know enough. I scoured the internet trying to figure out which one was actually better. And I kind of came to the same conclusions, that people just didn't want to sell stuff that they already had. You can't just settle. I think a lot of people settle for what they have, for what they could have. And that involves life and also 1JZ, 2JZ. But anyway, comment below. Love to hear from you. Toodles.